My daughter's teacher kept humiliating her in front of the class. I taught her a lesson she'll never forget. My daughter, Lily, had always loved school, but that all changed when she got Mrs. Langston for second grade. At first, everything seemed fine. Lily came home excited about her new classroom pet, a tiny turtle named Nibbles, and the cozy reading corner with bean bags. She spent her evenings practicing spelling words and drawing pictures for her teacher, eager to impress. I thought we had lucked out with a teacher who inspired enthusiasm. But that enthusiasm quickly turned into dread. The first warning signs appeared when Lily brought home her first red card. Mrs. Langston had a strict behavior system: green cards for good behavior, yellow for warnings, and red for infractions. Lily's first red card came after asking to use the bathroom during math. She had raised her hand and waited patiently, but Mrs. Langston insisted she should have gone during recess. Lily, desperate to hold it, ended up wetting herself and had to change into lost and found clothes for the rest of the day. When I emailed Mrs. Langston to discuss it, her response was cold and rigid. Children needed to learn time management. The red cards kept coming. Lily got one for helping a classmate with their worksheet, a simple gesture of kindness Mrs. Langston labeled as cheating. She got another for standing up to sharpen her pencil without permission, and one more for sneezing too loudly during reading time. By October, Lily was receiving red cards almost every day for trivial actions while other children did the exact same things without consequence. But the worst part wasn't the red cards themselves, it was the public humiliation. Mrs. Langston made Lily stand in front of the class to explain why she had been bad, forcing a 7-year-old to justify things like taking a sip of water or adjusting her seat. Lily began waking up with stomach aches, dreading school, and begging not to go. I requested a meeting with Mrs. Langston, hoping for an understanding conversation. Instead, she told me Lily was too sensitive and needed to toughen up. She even implied that better discipline at home would fix Lily's behavior. When I asked what acting out meant, she listed harmless things like humming quietly or wiggling in her seat, normal 7-year-old behaviors. Going to the principal yielded no relief. He explained that Mrs. Langston had been teaching for 15 years and had her own methods that worked. Things escalated until the day Lily got a red card for crying after skinned her knee at recess. Mrs. Langston forced her to stand in front of the class and declare that crying was for babies. The other children laughed while Lily, bleeding and embarrassed, apologized for showing emotion. That night, Lily asked me if she was a bad kid. She confided that the teacher had bragged to the class about how many red cards Lily had received, making her feel targeted and isolated. Something had to change. I began volunteering in the classroom weekly. Mrs. Langston couldn't refuse because the school encouraged parental involvement. I discreetly observed, taking notes on every red card Lily received. I befriended other room parents and subtly discussed Lily's situation, learning they had noticed similar patterns with their own children. The Mom Network began quietly documenting complaints. I also sent polite, persistent emails to Mrs. Langston and the principal whenever Lily received a red card, requesting detailed explanations and ceasing the principal periodically. This created accountability. The turning point came during the winter concert, when I managed the seating chart so that concerned parents were seated near the teacher. I arranged for Lily to introduce the class activities while intentionally omitting Mrs. Langston, whispering to others about the red card situation. By intermission, murmurs and side eyes from parents made it clear Mrs. Langston was uncomfortable. I kept building pressure through small but noticeable actions, coordinating parties with red-themed decorations to mock Lily's red cards, managing Teacher Appreciation Week so Lily's note highlighting the unfair treatment was on top of the pile. Parents read the cards, shock replacing polite smiles, and Mrs. Langston visibly faltered. Word spread, and more parents became aware of her biased treatment. Coffee dates with other parents revealed a consistent pattern. Several children, including Lily, were being unfairly targeted while others engaged in the same behaviors without consequence. We documented everything meticulously: dates, times, specific incidents, and children involved. This evidence began forming an undeniable case against Mrs. Langston's practices. By this point, the principal could no longer ignore the issue. We scheduled meetings with him, presenting our documentation. The school board, alerted by Curtis, a parent on the board, began investigating. Mrs. Langston, when observed by the principal, put on a facade of normalcy, but her retaliation became apparent after unannounced visits. Lily would come home with multiple red cards in a single day, clearly a response to the parental advocacy. Each time, I photographed the cards and Lily's test-streaked face, sending them to the principal, the school counselor, and Curtis to escalate the issue formally. This pattern of retaliation made it obvious that Mrs. Langston was punishing the children for complaints rather than actual behavior. By strategically volunteering, documenting, and building alliances with other parents, I created a system of accountability. Every small action, from seating charts to email correspondence, added pressure that made Mrs. Langston aware that her classroom practices were under scrutiny. Lily's anxiety remained, but the foundation was set for meaningful change. We were about to show the principal and the school board the extent of the damage caused by this teacher's methods. But just when we thought we were gaining control, the retaliation escalated, and Lily came home with more red cards than ever before, this time for things no child could avoid. How far would Mrs. Langston go before the school intervened? The next morning, Lily came home devastated. She had received 3 red cards in a single day, each more absurd than the last. One for writing her letters too large on her worksheet, one for humming softly during art, and one for taking a few extra seconds to line up for recess. She was sobbing so hard she could barely speak, her small body shaking with the force of her tears. I sat with her on the couch, holding her tightly and telling her over and over that none of this was her fault. Her tiny hands clutched mine as she whispered that maybe she really was a bad kid. That broke me. I knew something had to change immediately. I grabbed my phone and documented everything. Photos of the red cards, Lily's test-streaked face, and her trembling hands. I drafted an email to Principal Holden, the school counselor, and Curtis, detailing the retaliation and attaching the photos. I explained that this was no longer just unfair treatment. It was a deliberate escalation in response to parental complaints, and it needed to stop at once. That afternoon, I learned from Michelle that she had run into Mrs. Langston's sister, Courtney, in the teacher parking lot. Courtney, a 4th-grade teacher at the same school, looked nervous and kept glancing around as if she didn't want anyone to see them talking. Michelle said Courtney admitted that Mrs. Langston had changed over the last few years, becoming increasingly rigid, angry, and obsessed with discipline. Courtney confessed that she had noticed her sister unfairly targeting certain students while ignoring identical behaviors in others. She felt guilty for not speaking up sooner but feared causing family conflict. This confirmed everything we had suspected. Mrs. Langston's methods were not just strict, they were biased and damaging. With that information, I arranged an appointment with Maya Simmons, a child psychologist recommended by the school counselor. During the session, Lily drew pictures of her classroom and explained what they represented. One drawing showed herself standing alone in front of the class, her small figure dwarfed by the other students, all eyes staring at her while she was punished. Another depicted a giant red card covering her entire body. When asked how it made her feel, Lily said scared and embarrassed, and admitted that she dreaded school every day. After observing and interacting with Lily, Maya confirmed that she was experiencing clear anxiety directly related to the classroom environment. The constant public humiliation and unpredictable punishment system had created a fear response, affecting her ability to feel safe and learn. Maya provided a detailed letter recommending that Lily be moved to a different classroom immediately for her mental health, and instructed me to deliver it personally to the principal. I scheduled a meeting with Principal Holden the next day, bringing the psychologist's letter along with my documentation from months of observing and recording incidents in the classroom. I formally requested a classroom transfer for Lily based on documented psychological harm. Holden read the letter and initially resisted, citing concerns about mid-year disruptions in classroom dynamics. I leaned forward, reminding him that Curtis had already alerted the school board to the complaints, and that the board was closely monitoring the situation. I explained that Lily needed immediate protection from further harm, and that her mental health was at stake. I had copies of every email chain, classroom observation, and red card incident, as well as statements from other concerned parents. Holden's expression shifted from dismissive to tense as he realized this was no longer a simple parental complaint. It was a fully documented case that demanded action. 3 days later, Holden called to confirm that Mrs. Smith, the other second-grade teacher, had agreed to take Lily into her classroom. He mentioned that preparations were necessary to ensure a smooth transition and that both teachers needed to be briefed. I set a firm timeline. Lily would be in Mrs. Smith's class within 7 days, and if not, I would escalate to the next school board meeting with the full documentation. Holden, clearly frustrated but unable to argue effectively, agreed. I walked out of his office feeling a mixture of relief and lingering tension, knowing that the next steps were critical for Lily's well-being. The day of the transition arrived. I walked Lily to Mrs. Smith's classroom instead of Mrs. Langston's, and her demeanor immediately brightened. Mrs. Smith welcomed her with a warm smile, introduced her to her new desk, and pointed out the classroom routines with patience and kindness. There were no red cards on the wall, just a chart with stickers for completed work. Lily's shoulders relaxed, and she chatted eagerly with her new classmates about the class guinea pig and upcoming projects. For the first time in months, she seemed genuinely excited about school. That afternoon, when I picked her up, she talked nonstop about her day, her voice light and full of enthusiasm. Dinner was a peaceful meal. She ate without complaints of stomach aches or nervous stomach fluttering. Mrs. Smith later emailed me, praising Lily's participation, her curiosity, and her engagement, noting that while Lily was still slightly cautious, she was adjusting well. Meanwhile, I continued to coordinate with Michelle and Aliyah, whose children were still in Mrs. Langston's class and experiencing similar distress. We shared notes, documentation, and strategies for advocating effectively. Michelle mentioned that her husband, Curtis, was already working quietly with the school board, and Aliyah was ready to act decisively to protect her son. We created a detailed plan for documenting every red card, parent complaint, and interaction, ensuring that the school could no longer ignore the evidence. Over the next 2 weeks, both Emma and Aliyah's son were successfully moved to different classrooms, restoring a sense of safety and normalcy for them as well. The pattern of abuse in Mrs. Langston's classroom became impossible for the school to ignore. More parents reached out, sharing stories of previous years in which similar methods had caused their children's stress, anxiety, and even long-term avoidance of school. 2 parents of former students confirmed that their children had experienced public humiliation and excessive red cards, and that their complaints had been dismissed by Principal Holden. They wished they had advocated more forcefully at the time, and now wanted to ensure their experiences were documented for the ongoing investigation. I collected and forwarded these accounts to Francine Giawai, who was reviewing the case for the district, along with all of our detailed records, red card photos, emails, and psychologist reports. The district launched a thorough investigation. Over the course of 3 weeks, they interviewed parents, reviewed Mrs. Langston's personnel file, consulted the teachers' union, and assessed the pattern of complaints. Curtis kept me updated throughout the process, explaining that the school board and district were taking this seriously. The principal's repeated failure to act was documented, highlighting the systemic issue of oversight and accountability. While the union could have prolonged the process of termination for years, Francine informed us that an offer of early retirement to Mrs. Langston would remove her from the classroom quickly and prevent her from teaching in the district again, effectively protecting future students. The Monday after the transfer, Lily walked into Mrs. Smith's classroom with a mix of excitement and nervousness, but the tension that had haunted her for months was gone. Mrs. Smith greeted her warmly, showed her desk, and introduced her to a small group of students who immediately welcomed her. For the first time in a long time, Lily's steps felt light rather than hesitant. She returned home that afternoon bubbling over with stories. She had been able to raise her hand freely, ask questions, and even get up to sharpen her pencil without fear of punishment. Dinner that night was calm. Lily ate everything on her plate and even giggled over a funny story she had shared in class. The shift was dramatic, a clear indication of how deeply the previous environment had affected her. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering anger, knowing that Mrs. Langston's actions had caused months of stress that no child should endure. Meanwhile, the advocacy didn't stop with Lily's transfer. Michelle and Aliyah were still fighting for their children. Both Emma and Aliyah's son were showing signs of anxiety every morning, crying or refusing to go to school because of the ongoing red card system. We met at a local coffee shop to strategize. I pulled out my folder of documentation, which included photographs of red cards, emails to the principal, notes from classroom observations, and detailed entries from our shared document where we tracked incidents meticulously. I walked them through the process I had followed, documenting every incident with exact times, requesting meetings with the principal, and seeking professional psychological evaluations when necessary. Michelle and Alia nodded, exhausted but determined. Curtis, as a board member, offered guidance and reassured them that the board would support any reasonable request for classroom transfers or intervention. We started creating a comprehensive record for Emma and Alia's son. Every day, notes were added to the shared document, red card issued, the behavior cited, whether other students were treated the same way, and any visible emotional impact on the child. The pattern quickly became undeniable. Certain children were singled out repeatedly for minor infractions, while identical behaviors from other students were ignored or even praised. The system Mrs. Langston had created was not merely strict, it was discriminatory, arbitrary, and harmful. It became clear that the problem wasn't just a single teacher with a bad day, it was an ongoing, targeted abuse of authority. In parallel, I scheduled a meeting with the school counselor, who confirmed that Lily's anxiety and stomachaches were symptomatic of extreme stress caused by the classroom environment. The counselor could not discuss other children in detail due to privacy rules, but she indicated that she had noticed a worrying trend among several second graders. This implicit confirmation added weight to our case. It wasn't Lily alone who had suffered, but a recurring pattern of harmful treatment. With this professional insight, we felt confident that our documentation could support a formal district-level intervention if necessary. Within 2 weeks, our advocacy yielded results. Both Emma and Alia's son were transferred to different classrooms. The relief on their faces and the gradual easing of their morning anxiety reinforced how urgent and essential this action had been. Other parents began reaching out, seeking guidance on how to navigate similar issues with Mrs. Langston or other teachers. We built a small network of families documenting incidents and offering mutual support. Our shared knowledge empowered parents to stand up for their children in ways that the administration had previously dismissed. The situation caught the attention of the district as complaints accumulated. Curtis informed me that Francine Gry, a district official, was reviewing the compiled documentation, including Lily's psychological evaluation, the classroom observation notes, red card photographs, and email correspondence with the principal. The district began a thorough investigation, consulting with the teachers' union, interviewing parents, and reviewing Mrs. Langston's personnel file. It became clear that Principal Holden's repeated failure to act on prior complaints had contributed to the escalation and prolonged the harm to students. The evidence presented a stark picture: a teacher consistently targeting specific students, disregarding rules for others, and causing measurable psychological harm. While the district weighed its options, Mrs. Langston remained on high alert. She was aware that her actions were being scrutinized and that several families were documenting everything meticulously. However, her resentment simmered, and Lily's brief reprieve was overshadowed by the fear of retaliation. It became evident when, despite the principal's awareness, certain targeted students still received unfair reprimands, albeit less severe than before. Each incident was immediately documented, and emails were sent to the principal and board members to ensure accountability. The pattern was undeniable and placed significant pressure on the district to act swiftly. Eventually, the district offered Mrs. Langston early retirement as a resolution. This decision was strategic. Termination could have been contested by the union and prolonged for years, during which she might remain in the classroom or on full pay. Early retirement removed her from contact with students immediately and prevented her from teaching in the district again, while also documenting her departure under circumstances that reflected her misconduct. Though not perfect justice, it was the most effective and immediate solution to protect current and future students. Mrs. Langston accepted the retirement within days. The school board also addressed Principal Holden's role in the matter. The board reprimanded him formally for failing to properly supervise staff and for neglecting to document and escalate serious complaints about student welfare. Policies were revised. Principals were now required to maintain detailed records of all parent complaints and forward any incidents posing potential harm to the district office immediately. A parent liaison position was implemented at every school to ensure families had a reliable advocate, preventing future cases from being ignored. The system that had allowed Mrs. Langston's abusive behavior to continue unchallenged for years was finally dismantled. By the time Lily was fully settled in Mrs. Smith's classroom, her anxiety had started to fade. She actively participated in discussions, engaged with her classmates, and looked forward to school each morning. Although remnants of fear occasionally surfaced, her therapist assured me that with consistent positive experiences, these reactions would diminish. Beyond Lily's recovery, the broader impact was clear. Families were empowered to advocate for their children, school policies had been reformed, and the district had been forced to confront systemic failures in oversight. Even after Lily's transfer, the school remained tense. Mrs. Langston was officially in her final weeks before early retirement, but her presence still cast a shadow over the second-grade wing. Parents whose children had been victims were vigilant, documenting every interaction and minor incident. Emails flew back and forth with detailed descriptions of red card infractions, classroom behavior, and emotional reactions from the children. The administration, now under the scrutiny of the district and Curtis on the school board, had little room to ignore the mounting evidence. Every red card or unusual disciplinary action was reviewed carefully, with immediate accountability demanded. For the first time, it felt like the system was finally responding to protect the students rather than shielding the teacher. The district's investigation intensified. Francine Giawi conducted interviews with parents, students, and staff, and reviewed years of personnel records for Mrs. Langston. Several former students' families came forward, sharing stories of previous years in which similar public humiliations and unfair punishments had caused stress, anxiety, and even fear of attending school. Their complaints had been dismissed by the principal in prior years, who justified the teacher's behavior as strict discipline and preparing children for real-world challenges. The district now saw a clear pattern, a veteran teacher consistently targeting certain children while ignoring or rewarding the same behaviors in others. These findings painted a stark picture of systemic failure and highlighted the necessity of immediate corrective action. Parents began organizing, realizing that collective action could prevent this from happening to anyone else. I met regularly with Michelle, Alia, and a few others, pooling our observations, notes, and emails. Every day, new details emerged, children reporting increased stress, stomachaches, nightmares, or refusal to attend school. The documentation was meticulous, and the pattern undeniable. It became apparent that the problem extended far beyond one teacher's classroom. It reflected a broader issue of accountability and oversight within the school administration. Parents who had previously felt powerless now felt emboldened, their voices amplified by shared evidence and collective determination. Meanwhile, Lily's own transformation continued to be remarkable. In Mrs. Smith's classroom, she thrived. She engaged in discussions, completed her work without fear, and even helped classmates. Her anxiety, which had once been so severe it caused stomachaches and sleepless nights, began to fade. Yet, she sometimes glanced at me during homework or after a minor mistake, a brief reminder of how deeply the previous trauma had affected her. Her therapist assured me this was normal and expected, and that with consistent positive reinforcement, these responses would diminish entirely over time. Observing her regain confidence and joy in learning was both a relief and a validation of the months of advocacy, documentation, and persistence. As Mrs. Langston's retirement date approached, the tension in the school was palpable. Staff who had previously turned a blind eye were now more cautious. Teachers were aware that their classrooms were under scrutiny, that every disciplinary action could be documented and reviewed by parents or district officials. This quiet accountability shifted the school culture subtly but significantly. Parents, emboldened by our success with Lily, began asking more questions, advocating more assertively, and documenting incidents that might once have been ignored. The fear that had silenced them in previous years dissipated, replaced by a shared determination to ensure fairness and safety for all students. When the final day of Mrs. Langston's classroom duties arrived, the atmosphere was noticeably different. Students seemed lighter, less tense, and the staff treated her departure as a procedural matter rather than a dramatic event. The district's intervention had ensured that her exit would be swift and irrevocable. Early retirement was the fastest route to remove her from the classroom, and the consequences of her actions were permanently documented in her personnel file. For parents, students, and staff, the message was clear: harmful behavior would not be ignored, and advocacy could lead to real change. The aftermath of the investigation led to policy changes at the district level. Detailed records of all parent complaints were now mandatory, and any potential harm to students had to be escalated immediately. Parent liaison positions were established at each school, creating a direct channel for families to voice concerns without fear of dismissal. The system that had previously allowed Mrs. Langston to operate unchecked for years was replaced with procedures designed to protect students and ensure accountability. These changes reflected a recognition that student well-being must be the highest priority, regardless of a teacher's tenure or past reputation. In our small parent network, the relief was palpable, but the work didn't stop. Families who had previously been silenced now felt empowered to speak up whenever they noticed unfair treatment. I continued to advise parents on documenting incidents, requesting meetings, and, when necessary, seeking professional evaluations to support their claims. The culture of fear and avoidance that had allowed Mrs. Langston to flourish for years was replaced by vigilance, collaboration, and proactive advocacy. Parents learned that collective action and thorough documentation could safeguard their children, and that the system could respond effectively when presented with undeniable evidence. By the end of that school year, the transformation was clear. Lily was happy, confident, and fully engaged in her learning. Children who had previously endured fear and humiliation were thriving in safer, more supportive classrooms. Parents felt empowered to advocate without fear, and the school culture had shifted toward accountability and transparency. While the scars from Mrs. Langston's behavior lingered briefly, the combined efforts of families, the district, and compassionate teachers created a foundation of safety and trust that would endure for years to come. The weeks after Mrs. Langston's retirement were a mix of relief and reflection. Lily and the other children adjusted to their new classrooms, and the visible anxiety that had plagued them began to ease. Yet the battle to ensure accountability had only just shifted gears. Principal Holden, now under scrutiny from the district, faced questions about his oversight failures. Curtis, as a school board member, quietly monitored the situation, ensuring that Holden could not dismiss the complaints or revert to old patterns of ignoring parent concerns. Policies had changed, but enforcement would depend on consistent vigilance. I continued documenting incidents, advising parents, and coordinating with Michelle and Alia to make sure that the children were safe and that the system was held accountable. Even though Lily was thriving in her new classroom, the emotional residue of her time with Mrs. Langston lingered. She sometimes checked in with me after minor mistakes, worried that she might somehow get in trouble again, though these moments grew shorter and less frequent as she experienced consistent support and fairness. Her therapist noted that these reactions were typical for children who had endured sustained stress and humiliation, and reassured me that with time and positive experiences, her confidence would fully return. Observing her laughter, engagement in class, and eagerness to participate reminded me of the stark contrast between the toxic environment she had left behind and the nurturing classroom she now enjoyed. The district's investigation reached its final stages. Francine GRY reviewed all documentation from parents, teachers, and psychologists, confirming the repeated and targeted abuse that had occurred. She compiled the evidence into a formal report detailing systemic failures, including Principal Holden's repeated inaction, Mrs. Langston's documented targeting of specific students, and the resulting psychological harm. The district determined that early retirement was the most effective and immediate method to remove Mrs. Langston from the classroom while avoiding prolonged union disputes that could leave her in the school system for years. The decision was strategic but necessary. It protected current and future students and ensured that the consequences for her behavior were permanent. The school board held a special session to review the findings and determine how to prevent similar situations in the future. Several parents, including myself, attended to observe and provide testimony if necessary. The discussion was intense, with board members asking pointed questions about oversight, complaint procedures, and the policies that had allowed Mrs. Langston's behavior to continue unchecked for so long. Curtis and Francine emphasized the need for enforceable procedures, requiring detailed records for all parent complaints and immediate escalation of any potential harm to students. The board voted unanimously to implement these measures, alongside creating parent liaison positions at each school to ensure families had a clear, reliable channel for concerns. These structural changes represented a long-term commitment to student safety and accountability. Throughout this process, the children continued to heal. Lily flourished in her new classroom under Mrs. Smith's guidance. She participated actively in discussions, helped classmates, and approached tasks with a newfound confidence. Michelle and Alia reported similar improvements in their children, noting that morning anxiety, stomach aches, and tears had all but disappeared. Even for the children who had been most deeply affected, the removal of the toxic environment and the support from compassionate teachers created an immediate and measurable improvement in their mental and emotional well-being. It was a visible demonstration of how crucial a safe, supportive classroom environment is to a child's ability to learn and thrive. While the immediate crisis had been resolved, we remained vigilant. Parents continued documenting incidents, knowing that accountability depended on evidence and follow-through. The network we had built became a resource not just for advocacy, but for early detection of potential problems. Families shared observations, advised each other on best practices, and encouraged teachers and administrators to maintain consistent standards for behavior and discipline. This ongoing collaboration ensured that the mistakes of the past were less likely to be repeated and reinforced the principle that student well-being must come first. Principal Holden's formal reprimand was another milestone. The board recognized his repeated failures to act on prior complaints, noting that his inaction had contributed directly to the harm experienced by multiple students. Holden was required to follow the newly implemented documentation procedures rigorously, and he was made aware that any further lapses could cost him his position. This accountability was essential to rebuilding trust in the administration and signaling that oversight responsibilities were not optional, even for veteran staff. As the school year drew to a close, the transformation in the classrooms was remarkable. Students who had once approached the day with anxiety now looked forward to school. Lily had regained her curiosity and joy for learning, and her confidence had returned in a way that was steady and resilient. The removal of Mrs. Langston, the enforcement of new policies, and the creation of parent liaison positions contributed to a culture of transparency and protection. The long months of advocacy, documentation, and persistence had not only safeguarded the children who were directly affected but had also changed the system to prevent future harm. For the families involved, the experience was both exhausting and empowering. We had learned that parental advocacy, when combined with meticulous documentation and coordinated effort, could effect meaningful change even in the face of entrenched resistance. Our collective efforts not only ensured the immediate safety of our children but also set a precedent for accountability within the district. The network of parents we had built became an ongoing support system, allowing us to respond quickly to any potential issues and advocate effectively on behalf of all students. By the start of the new school year, the impact of the previous year's turmoil was still evident, but the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Lily walked into Mrs. Smith's classroom with a sense of calm confidence that was almost foreign to her a year ago. She greeted classmates, unpacked her supplies without hesitation, and approached lessons with curiosity rather than fear. The visible signs of anxiety, the stomach aches, the reluctance to speak, the constant seeking of reassurance, had mostly faded. Even when minor mistakes happened, she showed resilience, understanding that a safe classroom didn't punish mistakes but used them as opportunities to learn. For the first time in months, I felt that the months of stress, observation, and advocacy had truly paid off, and that my daughter's school could be a place of joy instead of dread. At the same time, the district reforms began to ripple through the entire school. Parent liaison positions were filled, providing families with clear points of contact to raise concerns without fear of dismissal. The detailed record-keeping procedures required of principals meant that complaints were now tracked, escalated, and addressed promptly. Parents in our network shared the news, feeling empowered and reassured that the system now had checks to prevent the kind of abuse we had witnessed. Teachers, too, were aware that disciplinary actions were being monitored more closely, and the culture in the school shifted subtly but meaningfully toward accountability and fairness. It was no longer acceptable for a single teacher to act without oversight, and the precedent had been set. Student safety came first. Meanwhile, Curtis continued to monitor the district level, ensuring that the school board and superintendent followed through on promised policy enforcement. The investigation and forced retirement of Mrs. Langston had sent shockwaves through the staff, and even veteran teachers were aware that arbitrary or punitive behavior could no longer be ignored. The administrative reprimands, coupled with the implementation of new protocols, sent a clear message that oversight was serious, and that ignoring parent concerns about student well-being could no longer be tolerated. Parents who had previously felt powerless now found a renewed voice, and the collaborative advocacy network remained active and vigilant. For Lily, the positive change was transformative. In Mrs. Smith's classroom, she not only kept up with her work but began to excel. She volunteered answers in discussions, helped classmates without fear of being reprimanded, and engaged in creative projects with enthusiasm. Her newfound confidence was a direct result of a safe, supportive environment, and the difference from the prior year could not have been starker. No longer did she worry about standing in front of the class to apologize for being a child, or fear a red card for innocuous behaviors. She had regained a sense of agency and pride in her learning, showing that children thrive when they are treated with fairness, respect, and understanding. The broader impact of the advocacy extended beyond Lily and her immediate friends. Michelle and Alia's children continued to show dramatic improvements in their well-being, and other families who had suffered in silence now had a model for how to advocate effectively. The collective efforts of parents, coupled with district oversight and policy reforms, ensured that the school's culture had shifted permanently. While vigilance remained necessary, the foundation for a safer, more transparent environment had been established. Students were being treated fairly, and families had confidence that any violations of safety or fairness would now be addressed promptly. Looking back, it was clear that the months of documentation, meetings, and coordinated action had been essential. Without meticulous records of red card incidents, without psychologist evaluations documenting the psychological harm, and without the support of other parents and the school board, Mrs. Langston's behavior might have continued unchecked. Our persistence had forced systemic change and protected not only our children but future students from experiencing the same trauma. The lesson was clear: advocacy, when combined with careful evidence collection and organized collaboration, could overcome even deeply entrenched administrative resistance. Yet, despite the successes, the experience left an enduring sense of vigilance. Parents remained watchful, aware that accountability must be maintained to ensure fairness for all students. The network we had built became more than just a response to one teacher's misconduct. It became a safeguard, a community of families committed to protecting children's mental and emotional health. Schools could no longer operate in isolation, ignoring patterns of abuse, because empowered parents and systematic oversight created a new standard. The combined force of advocacy, professional documentation, and policy enforcement had fundamentally altered the balance of power, placing student well-being at the forefront. Even months later, the transformation in Lily was the clearest proof of success. Her mornings were no longer a struggle. She eagerly shared her classroom experiences and participated fully in activities. She formed friendships, showed empathy toward classmates, and embraced learning with curiosity and enthusiasm. While occasional moments of hesitation reminded us of her past trauma, they were fleeting, and she quickly regained confidence. The contrast to the red card, fear-driven environment of the previous year was profound. It served as a daily reminder that children are remarkably resilient when given a supportive, nurturing environment, and that advocacy, persistence, and systemic oversight are essential in creating that environment. By the end of the school year, the transformation in the second-grade wing was undeniable. Lily, once anxious and fearful, had regained her confidence and curiosity, thriving in Mrs. Smith's classroom. Her laughter returned, her participation increased, and she began to approach challenges with resilience rather than dread. Even small moments, like raising her hand to answer a question or volunteering to help a classmate, became powerful indicators of her renewed sense of agency. The emotional scars from the previous year's trauma were fading, replaced with trust and security. Each day she walked into school with ease. It reinforced the importance of advocacy, persistence, and a supportive environment for children's well-being. Parents who had suffered in silence began to realize the impact of coordinated action. Michelle, Alia, and I continued our network, guiding other families on how to document incidents, request meetings, and obtain professional evaluations if necessary. Families who had once felt powerless discovered that their voices mattered and that systemic change could be achieved when concerns were presented collectively and with evidence. The network became a lasting support system, empowering parents to intervene before small problems escalated into trauma. It wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about creating a culture of vigilance, accountability, and protection for all students. The district's response to the situation sent a clear message: student safety and mental health were non-negotiable. Mrs. Langston's early retirement was permanent, and the documentation ensured she would not be allowed to teach in any other district within the state. Principal Holden faced formal reprimands and was required to implement new protocols immediately. The board's creation of parent liaison positions and mandatory escalation procedures meant that complaints could no longer be ignored. The system had been restructured to prioritize fairness and protection, and the precedent established would safeguard future generations of students. Parents and children alike could feel that advocacy worked, that their concerns could affect real change. Lily's recovery was both emotional and academic. She excelled in her studies, actively participated in classroom discussions, and engaged in creative projects without fear of reprimand. Her friendships flourished, and her ability to navigate challenges with confidence grew each day. She still occasionally glanced at me during lessons when unsure, a reminder of her past experiences, but these moments were brief and increasingly rare. Her therapist confirmed that with consistent support, her resilience would continue to strengthen, and the positive experiences she had in a safe environment would outweigh the trauma she endured previously. The contrast between her life under Mrs. Langston's rule and her current classroom was stark, a testament to how crucial a nurturing environment is for a child's development. The experience also reshaped the way parents interacted with the school system. Families realized that documentation, observation, and organized advocacy were critical tools in protecting children. Our efforts had demonstrated that even entrenched systems could be held accountable when presented with evidence, coordinated action, and persistence. The network of parents remained active, ensuring that issues could be addressed quickly and that patterns of unfair treatment would not go unnoticed. The lessons learned extended beyond one teacher or one school year. They became a blueprint for how families could safeguard the mental and emotional health of children in educational environments. As time passed, the positive ripple effects continued. Children who had been anxious, fearful, or withdrawn became more confident and engaged learners. Teachers, now aware that disciplinary actions were monitored and accountability was enforced, adopted fairer practices. The culture of fear and unpredictability that had defined Mrs. Langston's classroom was replaced with transparency, structure, and compassion. Parents could trust that advocacy would be taken seriously, that student well-being was the priority, and that the system had changed to prevent a repeat of past mistakes. The transformation was not only immediate but also systemic, ensuring long-term protection for current and future students. Reflecting on the journey, I realized how vital persistence had been. From documenting each red card and public humiliation to coordinating with other parents and working with the district, every step built the foundation for meaningful change. Lily's restored happiness and confidence were tangible outcomes of this advocacy, but so was the reform of policies and the creation of a culture of accountability. The experience underscored that standing up for a child's well-being was never optional, especially when institutions failed to act. It demonstrated the power of parents as advocates, of evidence as leverage, and of collaboration as a tool to protect those who cannot yet protect themselves. By the time the following school year began, Lily's life had returned to a sense of normalcy. She approached school each morning with enthusiasm, her backpack slung over her shoulder, eager to learn and explore. She had friends she trusted, a teacher who valued her contributions, and a support system that would always stand behind her. For parents, the satisfaction was profound. The months of anxiety, meetings, documentation, and advocacy had created lasting change. The school was no longer a place of fear and humiliation but one of safety, learning, and growth. The lesson extended beyond the classroom. The voices of parents, when organized and persistent, could transform systems, safeguard children, and prevent injustice.